After consuming a lot of content for this channel, I find myself ruminating over one aspect of storytelling that is all too often underwhelming: the antagonist. So, since what we do here is fix and rewrite media from the ground up, we might as well definitively establish what a good antagonist looks like, and answer the question, what makes a great villain? Let's dive in. Number 1. Might. What is a villain, after all, without power? Might is essential to any baddie. Our antagonist should wield a power greater than our protagonist does to add stakes to the story, because said gap in power will 1. Give our hero a goalpost to strive to, thus encouraging growth, and 2. Cause us to worry about the possibility of our hero failing. Said dominance can be established in multiple ways. Some stories use power scaling to form tiers that our protagonist and antagonist fall on. We see character A flex, we see the villain flex on character A, so we know the villain is stronger than character A and thus a threat. Others establish power less overtly by defining social dynamics that benefit the baddie over the hero. Regardless, every example you'll see from either category fulfills the same basic purpose: allowing the villain to strut their stuff. Once that strut starts though, a writer must be careful not to dilute their villain's power. Because once your audience sees an antagonist getting clowned on, they'll respect him or her less. If the villain leaves the hero alive for no reason, or uses convoluted plans that rely on luck, or if multiple jokes are made at the villain's expense, it'll become harder and harder for anyone to take them seriously. After all, if the script doesn't appreciate the character, why should we? That doesn't mean, however, that these scales of power have to exist in eternal stasis. On the contrary, sometimes this scale can be manipulated to great effect. Antagonists who grow alongside protagonists are also interesting. Showing a villain's journey subtly portrays a story's world as one that is fluid, shifting not just around our hero, but everyone. Although, side note, depending on how much screen time your villain gets, they could very easily shift from being an antagonist to a deuteragonist. When that occurs, you'll notice someone who was previously the villain gaining villains of their own. A story having multiple villains isn't a bad thing, though. Nor does your baddie have to be the top dog in order to be good. Take characters like Mr. Vader or the Winter Bucky. Neither of them are in charge of their organizations, yet they're clearly recognized and lauded villains. Why? Because their strength doesn't stem from social dynamics, it stems from action. Conversely, if they were in charge and weren't on the front lines, they'd still be able to function as credible threats to our protagonists. The shift would also shift their power source from direct might to social dynamics. Get it? Now, to wrap this section up, let's study someone who doesn't have might. Kylo Ren. What is Kylo Ren? He's whiny, he's incompetent, he's constantly clowned on, and he loses time and time again. I ask you, how are we supposed to fear this guy? How are we supposed to take him seriously? At the peak of his power, he has a higher rank than his grandpa ever did, but he's infinitely less menacing, because the writers dismantled him at every turn. That is why Kylo is often praised for his inner conflict and Adam Driver's performance, but rarely for his actual status as a villain. Because, quite frankly, he's never a threat. Number 2. Connection. What is a villain, after all, without their hero? The dynamic between protagonist and antagonist is vital to the latter's staying power. Because the more we understand what's transpiring between these two, the more we understand what is at stake. Now, this connection doesn't have to predate the narrative. There are plenty of examples of good villains who meet the hero during the same story wherein their clash occurs. Regardless, connection relies on history, so said history must be fleshed out before an ultimate confrontation can occur. Now, the easiest way to do this is by interaction. Ever notice how a lot of movies around the 2010s had scenes where the villains were captured? Yeah, there was a reason for that, so our hero and villain could chit-chat without getting into fisticuffs. I don't have any problem with this technique. You could say it's overdone, but I don't believe tropes are inherently good or bad. I think their merit is more case by case. Either way, it's essential to build a repertoire between these two opposing forces so as to develop tension. Superhero movies usually have at least one clash with the main villain prior to the climax for this very reason. But what if you can't do all that? What if it wouldn't make sense for your hero to encounter the villain until the climax?
Nope.
That's where foreshadowing comes in. Remember in the previous section where we talked about how might can come from social dynamics? Well, those social dynamics don't have to be shown up close. The audience can understand them through the actions of others. Take Game of Thrones. The White Walkers are an extension of the Night King. So every time we see the White Walkers getting into wacky shenanigans, we are bearing witness to the Night King's power. Same with Lord of the Rings. Sauron does not move from the beginning of the trilogy to the end, yet his presence is felt as soon as Frodo gets his nasty little hobbit fingers on the ring. Even before, since Bilbo is putting his grubby mitts all over it. Get it? Since these two villains have minimal face-to-face interaction with our heroes, their minions act as surrogates. Again, let's wrap up this section with someone who doesn't connect. This lady.
Who?
Most of you are probably looking at the screen like,
Wait a minute! Who are you?
you definitely don't know her name, so I'll tell you. It's Dar-Benn. Dar-Benn comes out of nowhere in the Marvels. The extent of the connection we get is that she ever so briefly met Carol in a flashback. That's it. So we don't feel anything when they see each other, nor do they have much to talk about. Psst. Hey, you know who would have been better here? Yon-Rogg. After all... Wait, what? They don't know who that is? No, not my boy Yon-Rogg. Sweet baby Rogg? Yeah, I'll tell them. Yon-Rogg is the villain from the first movie. He's Carol's mentor, who found her when she discovered her powers. He's also Kree like Dar-Benn, also a high-ranking officer, also not blue so the actor doesn't have to wear makeup. This was a baffling miss from Marvel. Well, I guess not that baffling considering the latest string of movies. Let's move on. Number 3. Ideology. What is a villain after all without a purpose? There are only two types of good villain ideologies. Parallel ones and perpendicular ones. Yeah, you're in geometry again. Welcome back, big dog. The more common ideologies are parallel ones. These are ideologies that stand in complete opposition to our hero's beliefs. For example, Harry Potter invests in his friends and relies heavily on the bonds around him.
Not me, not Hermione, you.
It's those bonds that carry him through the series all the way to its climax and beyond. Whereas Voldemort rejects bonds, rejects friendship, shuns everything and everyone in his pursuit of power. A power that Harry unequivocally rejects at the end of the saga. Rock Lee is a talentless loser, so he devotes 1000% of his effort into surpassing his limits. Whereas Gaara is such a prodigy that in combat, he doesn't even have to move. He just stands there.
Menacingly!
Both examples create friction between heroes and villains. Because it's not just their bodies fighting, it's their principles. And when those principles clash, we get to decide what we believe in, and see the struggle to reaffirm those ideologies play out. We care more about these conflicts because we easily understand and connect to the themes within them.
Wait a minute!
Some of you are wondering, what about villains like the Xenomorph, or the Cloverfield monster? Horror movies, and some sci-fi movies, have their own special little subcategory here. They're still parallel villains in my opinion, but instead of opposing the protagonist, they often oppose the audience directly. Horror villains are unique in that they usually represent abstract concepts like violation, or grief, or chaos, or assimilation, which is why memorable horror villains often overshadow the protagonists they face. Because their enemy, at the end of the day, is us. Circling back, the less common ideologies are perpendicular. These are ideologies that coexist on some level with what our hero believes. The only difference is that at some point, hero and villain diverge. Perfect example of this is Magneto. He and Xavier both want what's best for mutant kind. But whereas Xavier believes in a peaceful solution, Magneto's experiences have driven him to a more militant option. This same dynamic is almost identically replicated in T'Challa and Killmonger, even down to their backstories. You'll notice that the scope of perpendicular ideologies tends to be much grander than parallel ones. That's because these ideologies are usually focused on larger concepts that affect parties far beyond our hero and villain. Perpendicular ideologies also show up often in deuteragonists, who can shift in and out of the villain role. Also, quick side note, in order to condemn the villain in the eyes of the audience, writers will sometimes make perpendicular villains have a kick the dog moment, where they do something unequivocally bad. This is lazy in my opinion, as the audience should be allowed to make up their own mind, but it's something to look out for and thus worth mentioning. Now, as per the usual, let's give an example of someone who isn't parallel or perpendicular. Enchantress. If you don't remember, she's from...
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
What is her ideology? What are our heroes' ideologies? Something about...
Family.
I think. Neither of these parties even talk to one another for more than a few seconds. Yeah, Rick Flag was dating Enchantress's alternate personality, but that's barely a thing. Philosophically, these two groups aren't parallel, perpendicular, or even in the same area code. So nobody is invested in their confrontation, because neither party represents anything. So, when it comes down to it, does a villain need all three things, might, connection, and ideology, to be good? I think so. I challenge you to come up with a good villain who doesn't have these three traits. Maybe there's one out there, who knows? I'm open to being wrong. But I don't think I am, because at the very least, these traits are a blueprint for greatness. Not a definitive one, but a fairly holistic one. And I believe if done right, using this blueprint can build an antagonist worth remembering. That's all I've got for this one, folks. Like and subscribe if you will, because I'd like to cycle in more essays on writing, along with the usual rewrites, series fixes, along with whatever else I feel like. And until the next one, cheers.